Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we're going to be discussing wealth and shared humanity. What are the effects of a person that is coming from the first world? Coming into the third world, what can we notice in terms of how people's actions are determined, maybe influenced by having a lot of money, lacking money? How does mutual trust exist within these people? How does wealth inequality affect, not only at a national level, but at a global level, the minds of ourselves as individuals in this world? How do we value ourselves as money? But also, we will look at how would it be if people in this world get to a point of empowerment, and how to deal with this process at people's minds, and in essence their psychology. How would this notion of now being equally empowered, equalizing the playing field, can also create certain changes, and what can we do to assist in that, let's say, integration into a world where everyone is entitled to a dignified living? So we will be discussing this today with Lysander V. He is from the Netherlands. He is a psychologist and world traveler who has gathered a lot of interesting points throughout his various visits to many countries around the world. So without further ado, introducing you, welcome to the Hangout, Lysander.
Thank you.
And to our audience, I'd like to remind you that there will be questions and comments that you can place throughout the live discussion. If you are watching on YouTube, please also place comments and questions. We will make sure that Lysander gets them as well if you didn't make it to watch it live. So this discussion will be running for about 40 minutes, a little bit more maybe. It all depends on you as well, if many questions come up. So let's start with first you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself within the context of you being a psychologist, and what motivated you at the same time to travel around the world.
Okay. So I'm Lysander. I'm 33 years old. I come from Amsterdam, Holland. And psychology, I started studying it because of my mind, the human mind, and possibly also how to work with it. So that I studied for 5.5 years. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist and social psychologist. And after that, I continued exploring and studying the mind through meditation and other techniques. And after my studies, I wanted to travel, see what the world's like, see how I would react by myself in a completely strange environment. So I traveled to India, Nepal, and Laos, Burma, and Cambodia, and saw a lot of things there, and came back and started studying coaching as well. So I'm actually a coach and a psychologist, and that's it for that. And then I traveled to Africa at certain points where I'm now. To see more of the world and see what's cooking over here.
Okay, and we will be essentially diving into, of course, as a psychologist, noticing certain patterns that you, coming from, once again, first world, Amsterdam, start noticing in people when relating to people with locals in what we can define, for the purpose of simplifying the term, third world countries or underdeveloped countries, poor societies. So let's dive into the conversation with a point you mentioned in what you've written in terms of sharing, and how the disposition to share is different from a wealthy person in terms of both material and sharing as yourself. There's a difference between the rich and the poor in this sense. So how does this work?
Well, what I noticed coming from a first world country, comparing to a third world country, is that there are major differences. Of course, between how reality is lived and perceived, and also how social relations are lived. Not only amongst the people themselves, but also interculturally. So, what I noticed was that the people in third world countries, and this is very generally speaking, of course, are usually more prone to be more open and more willing to share. In that sense, that people with less means of getting by are more prone to, yeah, to share and to be open with you as a stranger, compared to first world countries where people are more individualized and more looking after themselves, you would say. I thought that was very striking, the difference. Yeah.
So in this sense, one would logically think that, of course, if you have more, you will share more. So why do you think that this works the opposite way? What happens also in the mind of, let's call it a first world person that is more already guided by the material mind, the value, the worth of things, and kind of adding this concept of themselves to them that prevents them from sharing as much as a person would in comparison to a person that doesn't have as much. So what happens there? What have you noticed or realized from that?
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of factors that play in this respect. But I think one of the fundamental factors is that the more Western cultures, richer cultures, are more individualized. So yeah, you have to make it on your own. While in more poorer societies, sharing is of course of big importance, because if you don't have bread today, your neighbor gives you today, and the neighbor doesn't have bread tomorrow, you give him some bread tomorrow. So the reciprocity aspect is far more important. You have to do it together actually to survive, you could say. So as that is practiced over and over again over generations, you could say that's almost encoded, at least within a cultural perspective, cultural subconscious, you could say. And compared to Western society, where people are really living for themselves, they have to make career for themselves. Yeah, it's much more individualized. So I think that's one of the major aspects that play here. Yeah.
And let's dive into this. You mentioned that it is so, or it is possible that wealth becomes like an equivalent of one's ego or one's worthiness, or what you define as a psychological makeup of a person. So how can one identify this? How can we also see it?
Well, what you can see, of course, it's not only in the Western world, but you could say it's more perhaps emphasized in the Western world that money equals power and status. So if you're focused on money as a psychological means of self-worth, for example, um, you will notice that you will not only use it as a means for survival, for buying bread, but it's also linked with status and showing off. And once again, I'm not saying this is not part of the third world as well, but there are many factors interacting here. And what I just referred to, so reciprocity versus individuality, is a part of play still as well. So that is to say, in the Western world, it is more also a psychological means of showing off and your status. So that locks into also a design of greed and wants to accumulate more and able to be able to show off more. While in the third world, it is more a means of survival. You have some money, you buy some bread, and you share. And there's also, by the way, happiness in sharing. I mean, that's been proved countless times in psychological research as well, and which is something the Western world actually would do to to realize that at a certain point. Also because we need to survive as a planet, but that's a different topic. So yeah, it's more in third world countries not so much focused on a psychological gratification point of money is something immaterial, almost you could say, and it's far more hardcore material in a third world country. Yeah.
And here we will also start also discussing this usual concept of, for example, poor people are happier because they're not so much concerned about material possessions and so forth. But let's start also discussing in relation to colonialism to begin with, and how what has happened in this world is that the reason why there's poverty is a man-made thing, and it has been the outflow of historical processes where some nations have dominated others, and with that, of course, the people that have been made slaves have been exploited and have been the result of this imposition of the strong versus the made weak or weakened people, and how this then makes people more subservient, meek, humble. I mean, I can see it also here in Mexico. Many foreigners can say that the same, Mexico being considered in a way as a third world or underdeveloped country as well, and how they say, you know, people are so nice and so open and so warm. But then I also always point out, well, you know, there's been like colonial processes, which means imposition, that have made them that way, because if they didn't comply, of course, there was punishment, and this whole thing exists at a psychological level. So how do you see in your travels that this could have impacted the people that you met in all these countries?
Yeah.
From your perspective, is it a very important factor still or not? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's still a major influence. Of course, there's not like factual colonialism anymore, in the sense that there's direct oppressors or direct colonizers, and their subdued countries. But of course, there's still, on many levels, it is still very present. Not only, of course, the more subtle manipulation and colonization in terms of business life, etc. But if you look also at the psychology, I think, of the former repressed, colonized cultures, you see that it is very deep ingrained still. You know, if you look at how they think and respond to authority, mainly, that's a huge point. You could say that the colonial stamp is really there still, you know. For example, I've been in a couple countries in Africa, also in Zambia, and what I found there shocked me quite a bit, actually, because there was a school right next to me, and yeah, I heard how the children were being taught, you know, and it was kind of ruthless. It was with hard force and oppression, you know, shouting against the children, giving the punishments in a really hardcore way, which really, for me, much resembled old colonial structures, in that sense that, yeah, in old colonial times, you know, there was also harsh punishment, and they had to listen, and otherwise, you know, they would be punished, etc., etc. So, you know, that mindset of authority and dominance and submission, that is still very much alive, you know. So on that point, that was quite striking. And yeah, of course, if you know, if this cycle perpetuates, what you create, I mean, these are children. These children will be drilled in subservience, you know, in listening to authority. So yeah, and of course, there's also religious aspects. You know, the majority is still Christian or Muslim, but I've seen Christian, and they still adhere very much to the Christian principles as well, which is a colonial product in the end. So yeah, that's all combined together makes the people very subservient and obedient, which is, I think, a direct inheritance from the colonial past. Yeah.
So, in terms of this relationship that people create also with foreigners, and this is in the context of your experience as a traveler, you notice that, okay, maybe they behave this way to you, but could you also see more as an observer of how they, you know, related to one another in their community? So, does this point of being humble and sharing, does it still apply, at least from what you observed, regardless of them relating to you as a foreigner?
Yeah, that's interesting question. Well, I have been in a local village in Zambia, and what I did notice there is that not only the people are nice to me, I did notice a white skin effect in some countries, for example in Malawi. But what I still notice is, yeah, this aspect of authority and pleasing authority, you could say, listening to authority. Yeah, it's still penetrated through all layers of their society, you know. So they could, of course, see me as an authority because I got a white skin still, which might be programmed in their subconscious still. But concerning being meek and obedient, it's just still very much alive in every layer, within societies that I've seen at least. So yeah.
And in this also, let's talk about money and what you mentioned creates levels of distrust between human beings. Can you explain about this?
Yes. Well, again, of course, there are many factors involved, but money creating distrust between human beings. Well, generally, if there's scarcity of something, and money is a scarce mean, especially in the third world, but of course, also in the first world. You tend to distrust someone. Let's say, for example, you are a rich man and you start a company somewhere in Africa in the third world, and you let me see how to put this. Look, money is something that is a scarcity. So if you have two people and one has more than the other, and you go into comparison, which what humans do, especially if it's a status thing, you tend to distrust the other on a subconscious level, because you are directly comparing yourself to the other, hence concluding that your social status is perceived as less as the other. So what you get is like a sort of subconscious battle between you having less and the other having more. And if things go wrong, you get a really like a distrustful relationship between the two, because there's this battle, you could say, the psychological battle often means that they're scarce. So yeah, money creates distrust on many levels. I mean, also if you look in a first and third world relationship, if people from the third world really start to realize how the first world, for example, has a lot of money, and they perceive this difference, and they see at a certain point how they are being used and exploited by the rich, then the money factor is seriously impacting the view of the third world on the first world. Jealousy can ensue, and the first world notices this, and they start to distrust the third world because they might become too aware or too aggressive or whatever. I think the baseline you could draw here is that money is a form of power, simply. And power equals inequality at a certain point, because one has more than the other. And this difference in relations, puts people up against each other at a certain point. I think that's the bottom line. Yeah.
And in the end, if we look at when we consider how these relationships can be changed, it is obvious that money is, in fact, as we've discussed also many times in these Hangouts, how it is a construct that we created. It is an agreement that we decide how it functions. So if we really look at it, it is also like a form of mind control or brainwashing to still allow these concepts to rule at the level of saying, I'm equal to this money and I will create this relationship to another individual based on them having less money. What we have to always remind ourselves is that these are constructs, outflows of us not essentially giving to everyone that right to be empowered, which is, as we were mentioning with money, so as to not see money as a problem that creates distrust, but the current setup of how money is not given to everyone as a living right, for example. So in this sense, what have you also been able to observe in relation to the social economic status and people's survival? How does that relate to people, how they use their mind or how they act within themselves? What have you noticed?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, in relation to the social economic status and survivalism, what you've noticed in relation to people that live in a more survival mode and those that are less, in relation to how they start thinking and so forth.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there is, of course, a difference between survival mode of a rich Westerner versus a poor African, for example. What you see is that people in the West are generally more thinking more complex, you would say. And I absolutely don't mean this patronizing or whatever, but the structures are more complex. You know, you have to think about who to network, who to befriend, what are the plans, the schemes. You know, it's politics more, you could say. And once again, I'm not saying it's not in third world countries, but I'm just getting a bare bones baseline. Eh? So it is more complicated. It's more mind work, you could say. You know, and in third world countries, it's more focused on basic survival. So what you see is that people are less preoccupied in their minds with these whole complex structures they have to run and to live to get what they want, basically, you could say. So what you also notice if you interact more with a third world country person is that they are less complicated and less going into complicated mind structures, you could say. So in the end, what the end product is, what I really noticed, that although there is of course a lot of stuff going on and planning and how to get money, that is less complex. It's less layer upon layer of structuring within the mind. So what you get in the third world countries, what I noticed, is people are more straightforward in a way. You know, they have less masks, less facades, less mannerisms, and it feels more real, more authentic, you know, in the interactions. So with that comes also less complexity, of course, and yeah, it feels more real. It's less like their masks. And interesting thing is, you know, although I've been in India, for example, and you know, you do get ripped off, and you know, people try to get the best of you in terms of money and stuff, which is logical anyway. Even those people felt more real. You know, they might have been lying in my face, you could say, but nevertheless, on a sort of resonance level, those people felt more authentic because there were less masks to hide behind, because there was less mind activity, less layers and complex stuff they had to hide behind. You know, their inner reality seemed more real, more condensed, you could say, instead of hiding behind multiple layers, you could say. So that's what struck me actually.
So we see how this simplicity is linked with having less money in a way, but in the end, if we look at it within a holistic perspective and within the context of empowering people, now it's when we shift into the discussion of how would all of this change if we suddenly stop poverty in itself, stop these definitions of first world, third world. What would happen to people as we decide to, for example, implement a living income, a basic income, to elevate living standards, to really kind of let people know that they are entitled to that they should be having a good living condition, just as people from first world, for example, and how that would start affecting them at a psychological level. Because from what we've briefly mentioned, and there's many other aspects, but from what you've mentioned, it does seem, or our viewers can also understand, that a person that has more money is more complicated, more self-interest driven, more cunning in the ways to get money and things like that, more valuing themselves according to the relationships they have, the material possessions, all of these. But what would, from your perspective, could happen if now we start kind of liberating people from being poor, empowering them? What would you say could be sort of like the process? And of course, this is hypothetical in a way because it hasn't happened yet entirely. But what can you share on this perspective?
Yeah. So one thing I definitely think that should be done is, of course, you know, empower them, give them like humanitarian conditions so they can live like a decent life. Of course, you know, give them those financial means. But what's imperative is to include education as well. You cannot just give money and think it will solve all the problems, because you know, all these years and who knows, lifetimes or whatever, all this deep programming that has been going on over centuries, and it's like entrenched in the culture and everything. You cannot just erase issues that come with that just by giving money. You know, so you would really, really have to educate the people. That is absolutely a necessity. Yeah. So education, like how to spend money, for example, because there has been actually a project run here in South Africa where it was easier to loan money. So people had easier access to money, with the idea that people would then start a little business, start investing in some project. And what actually happened was that people at the end of the month had the same amount of money, which was nothing. So what happened? They just had more money to spend on stuff that does not make them prosper in the end. More drinks, for example, or more expensive clothes. Yeah, and the end result was nil. So yeah, you really need to educate people. It's fundamental. Yeah.
And in this globalized world, I mean, where everyone is looking at the latest items of luxury, fashion, and
Mhm.
the world of the rich, so to speak, that can be accessed through the internet. That's been also an interesting phenomenon, because now people are acquiring those models of this is what people should aspire to be, celebrities, and all of these. That's is now starting to permeate a lot around the world, even in
Mhm.
places where there's barely electricity. So that is also creating a huge impact on people's psychology of what being rich should feel like, and what everyone should be aspiring to. And I consider that all of this is so important to consider when empowering people, so that precisely that money is not misused. um, I mean, it probably will happen that at the beginning people will go into that notion of, I have money, I can spend it in all of these luxuries and unnecessary things. But eventually there has to be like a process of supporting people through media, through culture, through events, through also creating new role models in the culture itself, to give them the notion that, this notion of power, wealth to the top, the riches, etc., is unsustainable, it's a farce, it has been a scam, it cannot be sustained. And those models and those mind experiences that come with the idea of wealth and power should be exposed for the falseness that they are, because they're in essence not really something that is supportive to life. It's not supportive to an individual. It's just a construct in the mind. So in this, when we look at, for example, what has happened also in South Africa, what have you observed from people that, uh, what has been the process after the apartheid, from being dominated by the whites, and now what's happening with Black people there? Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah. Well, of course, apartheid was a structure that was no good. It was directly linked to oppression and supremacist, yeah, ideology. White is better than black, you could say. And what that did, in the end, was creating a lot of frustration and anger. You know, uh, I think, look, once again, I'm not a specialist in the South African social matters, but what I got from it is that once they were liberated from apartheid, was that there came like enormous rage came out. So now it was their time. The white man should pay his dues now. We are in power, we are equal, and we're going to, yeah, to vent our anger actually, or to make things right. That is actually more the essence of it, I think. And with that came a lot of, yeah, suppressed anger and frustration that came out. Um, it's also been sanctioned by black people here also to really get back on the whites, so take back the land, and even aggression is permitted. So what you get is, yeah, an enormous outburst of suppressed frustration and anger, and yeah, they take it out on the whites, and they see that as getting equal, getting even, perhaps, and this is a division of power again, because of course the whites have power and the blacks have very little. And yeah, that is sort of threw things out of balance.
And what would your
Yeah,
perspective be as a psychologist, also in terms of, it's like vindication, vengeance, which we can all relate to at an individual level. If we think and perceive that someone has done unto us, many people hold on to that rage and anger and a sense of vindication and wanting to do the same unto them. I mean, that is reflected at national level and even worldwide level, wherein if we look at within the context of what we're speaking on, the hypothetical process that will take place once that people start being empowered, how to mediate, how to assist people also to be able to understand these processes of, yes, domination, or even not only in South Africa, but in our societies, even Western societies, where we tend to see at the capitalist as the rich, greedy bastard that we have to get down from the top, and we will, as some people say, get the like I forgot the word, but it's like a weapon, like going against them entirely. And this is something that is like a real fear in people in the elite societies right now, that if people really start getting empowered in some way, their own lives are at peril, so to speak.
yeah.
So that can become a problem, isn't it? Like going against now the other side. So what's your perspective on this? What could be done?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to establish role models as well. Education, showing consequences. What could happen if people react to each other. The problem is that humans, to a large extent, still are instinctual animals, and they operate by basic drives, and vengeance, you could say, is one of them. Let's say it like that. So what you need to counteract that is, I think role models is very important. You appoint a couple of role models that people can look up to, that get respect from the local communities, and that calm the people down, that talk sense into them. I think that is seriously something that should be done. And other than that, showing a willingness, from the white community, you could say. And what also seems to be really helpful is apology. Saying we're sorry, we didn't mean to. I mean, you see it now as well in the Netherlands, for example, where there was an issue with the national holiday, and there was some symbolism of the old colonial oppression, and all the black community wanted was an "I'm sorry," that was really emphasized. So being acknowledged in being wronged is a very it's a powerful tool in repairing past damage, you could say, within damaging self-esteem and self-worth from the past. Now,
I think that's also very important, like in a way forgiving what has been done and what has happened at a historical level. I mean, I can see it even still existent in most of the Latin American countries that have been colonized, that sense of being oppressed and at some point getting back at the oppressors is just a prevalent thing, not only here, but around the world. And I think that, as you mentioned, along with the solution of empowering people through money, it's so very important to still consider all of these post-colonial realities and the notion of how all of these traits and psychological experiences of having been oppressed and feeling angry about it, all of these will be a process that we will have to walk as humanity. Because if we don't do it, then, as you were mentioning, we are still acting at a very primitive level where some people might say, oh, now I'm empowered, I'm going to get back at those people that have done wrong unto me, that have oppressed me, that have kept me as a slave in the capitalist machine. So I think that aligns perfectly well with what we propose as a living income as well, and as Equal Life Foundation. That basic income, living income, comes along with this process that needs to be considered and walked at a psychological level. And you've called it the psychological foundation that comes from empowerment, which is all of these that you've mentioned. And I'm sure that it will develop also with time, as many more people realize that, sure, we're going to eradicate poverty, and with that comes a lot of changes and a lot of preventive measures to, from my perspective, and I think that many people can agree, not to copy the same mechanisms in which, let's say, the Western mind or the first world mind has been now conditioned into, like this loss of the concrete jungle and things like that. So what's your perspective on this? Any added notions to it?
To what exactly?
To what I explained in relation to this consideration of the psychological, let's say, integration and changes that will come when empowering people through
Hmm.
living income, through just letting them know, look, you're entitled to live in dignity. Poverty is a construct, man-made thing. We can make it disappear. Now you will be entitled to the lifestyle or the living
Yeah,
conditions that first
yeah.
world people live in, but how to also prevent them in a way to copy the same mindset and starting to
Ay,
like
ay, ay.
equate themselves to their ego and buying fancy stuff, things like that. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
reality that we're living in, even more so with the culture that we're currently living in. So what's your
yeah.
take on this?
Phew. Okay, that's a task at hand, eh? Because we don't only have to educate the third world, but also the whole first world, actually the whole world. Because now
Exactly.
we live in a system um, where greed is glorified almost, and the instinctual aspects that in the end harm the world in itself in its totality. That should be taken on, of course, and greed is one of the biggie ones. So what we have to do then is create like a global awareness, and I think it is growing. Things are actually more polarizing, you could say, but there is a substantial group that is growing in awareness that the way it goes now is not the way. Otherwise, we destroy ourselves. So um, the movement, you could say, of we're all equal in a sense that we're all human beings, first of all, and equal in a sense that we're all facing the same problem, ecologically and globally. That awareness needs to take hold, needs to get firm roots. And as soon as people start to understand that, that not only environmental issues should be addressed, but also social issues, because like what you see now in with the immigrants in Europe, I mean, it's completely logical. I mean, we as Europeans, as Westerns, we completely uh, it's decreed over our own selves. It's our own fault. This was bound to happen sooner or later. So the thing is, we should start realizing that we're all on the same planet and have limited resources up until now, what we have now. And we have to realize we have to share it equally. Otherwise, you get shifts like this, like shifts of people moving all over the world to the richer places, which creates chaos. Simply put, equality and oneness. And I mean, that's the whole point. And there's no other way. And we get it in our face now, and it was bound to happen. So then, yeah, greed is a point that needs to be addressed drastically, because
And also
that's
like being understood for why it exists. Like there's this actually a fake scarcity of resources that is propagated, so that notion has to be debunked, because there's in fact sufficient. What has been happened is that it hasn't been distributed, given to everyone as it should. People have not been made part of the economy, which is why poverty exists, but it has been a deliberate process. So the moment that, how I see it as well, is that we empower people by becoming aware of this, that it's not like how God wanted them to be or how their culture has always been, and they will always remain as the poor people, because that is also very ingrained. People sometimes, or most of the times, even don't see a future for themselves. So it will be a
true.
process of opening them to say, look, you are now entitled to this as a living right. This is who you are as a human being. Your worth is what you're able to be and live as everyone else. There's no need to fight for resources. We can create agreements. We can come to a sense of community, real sense of community around the world. But of course, this will take changes in the economic system, political system, everywhere else. And of course, within the individual, to be willing to let go of these notions of, as you're mentioning, the empowerment with material possessions, greed in itself, and also to explain to people that will be empowered for the first time, so to speak, throughout generations, of course, to not copy those same mechanisms and to keep that sense that you were mentioning at the beginning of sharing, community, humbleness, maybe even more pure and having this integrity within themselves, even if they have to survive. So taking like the best of both worlds in a way and integrating them to the future society of this world. And within this, I would also propose that money is redefined or conceptualized in a different way, not only as this object of power and control and defining who you are and your status, but rather simply that key, that access to what you need to live. So in this redefining what we need to live, like basic needs, luxuries and things like that, that can be bought, of course, they will continue to exist, but to keep people's minds and awareness directed to what makes life possible, to very much distinguish what is needed, what is not needed entirely. And also, as we've discussed in this social context of forgiving also those that have, yes, been the controllers, the ones that imposed the problem, and that sense of, as you're saying, we are all in this world, the problem affects us all, so we have to kind of keep that sense of equality and working together instead of saying, oh, now I'm empowered, I will go against the bad guy, so to speak. That's what we don't support, we don't want it to happen. So what's your take on this, and any also last words or points that you'd like to bring through in the Hangout?
Yeah. The only thing I can say is we can empower the third world countries, and it's absolutely something we have to do. You know, also for our own survival as first world countries, you could say. It's imperative. With this, it's also necessary that there comes education. How to spend the money, how to live wisely, etc., etc. But in the end, it is not only a third world thing, it's absolutely also a first world thing. It's a global thing. It's a human thing we have to address. Because, you know, greed must not be underestimated. It is not only something that will exist, that will not exist anymore if everybody has enough money to get by. You know, because it's a deep, deep psychological mechanism of comparison, of comparing yourself to another. And you know, this has also, like you could say, biological or evolutionary roots. So this is the hard thing. You know, that's actually where the real problem starts. So we have to educate ourselves within ourselves and with each other. Of course, seeing the long-term consequences, but also the psychological reality of being able of letting go of this greed, and also what kind of relief that actually can bring. You know. Because greed is a force, energetic force of it's a negative force in a way, you know. In
And
the
also
end, you're
like
comparing something there, and yeah, either you're feeling full of pride, you know, because you have more than the other, because of all your greed. If it's ever enough, by the way, eh, to begin with. If it's not enough, you always want more. You're in this unrest, and you're always chasing. But even if you're in a state of pride, you know, you're vulnerable because you made an image of yourself being something more than, and being more than is because it's in terms of money, it's in terms of scarcity. You can lose it, and within this, in the back of your mind, if you're subconscious, there is a feeling of fear associated with it as well. So you might pose as a big man with all your money, but there's of course this little man inside, as we all know, that's living in fear actually. So, anyways, the greed problem is extensive, and the problem is also because it can feel good. People associate it also with being something good, and we all have to realize that greed is not good. and will cause serious problems as it is doing now already, but also intra-individually, within the individual itself. And that's what needs to be seen. And yeah,
And also
yep.
emphasizing the benefits of actually sharing and living
Oh
in
yeah,
this dignified
doing
manner without excesses and all of these, and rather be able to now kind of turn the tide from glorifying wealth, glorifying the celebrities, glorifying everything that shines and it's bright and took many slaves to get out of the ground like a diamond, things like that, and to rather expose it for the actual abuse that it is, which is an ongoing trend that I would actually also invite our viewers to continue to be part of and exposing. And what we share in social media, it's like definitely this from one another education that you're talking about. Now we have this powerful media that we can expose these kind of things so that we start discharging all of these values onto this notion of what wealth and being rich is, and rather see the benefits of what happens when a community works together and
um,
creates this sense of self, not defined by this money. Money should be seen as an instrument, a thing
yeah,
that enables you to work, to live
yeah,
well, instead of a means in itself, an end in
yeah,
itself.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting indeed what you're saying, the sharing aspect. I mean, it's been shown in research and many case studies that when people are in dire situations, they're almost about to lose their life, for example, or they get terminal illnesses, and they're being asked, like, what can you tell, the people in this world, the survivors? What is the biggest lesson you can give us? And it is almost always the same. And they say, it's love is what you hear a lot. It's about love and sharing. You know, sharing what you know, sharing love, and yeah, sharing is a form of powerful form of giving you aspects of happiness. It has been shown countless times in many studies that giving is actually, yeah, giving a lot of pleasure to those who give, actually, and usually actually more than the one who receives. That's even more interesting, eh? But we're all locked in this belief that we have to have greed, and it's empowered by the media and stuff, which is completely opposite world, actually. So the power of giving, you could say, also for your happiness for yourself, is also something very important to realize. Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think that I will also, at the stage that we are at right now at a world level with all of these problems with immigration, which has been precisely taken from the ones that already had, now with giving them back with and letting them know that they are human beings, they are entitled to the same rights as everyone else. This can be reversed and actually uh, can be a process for humanity to also start considering what's really worthwhile, what really creates security, what really creates growth, what really creates prosperity, all of these things that we crave for by all the wrong means, as you explained. So we have to reverse the tide, reverse the constructs, and rather see the benefit of what it is to live exactly almost opposite to what we've all been conditioned to think life should be in a way, and
Mhm.
how to survive and all of this. So we've reached the end of the hangout. So I'd like to thank you very much for having this discussion and sharing all of these interesting perspectives. Of course, there's a lot to explain on psychology and all of what can be seen in this context of at a socioeconomical level, but this is only like a tidbit of it in the context that we are also interested on, which is empowering people, how would that affect their minds and so forth. So any last words that you'd like to share?
Um, no, just want to thank you also very much. Really enjoyed it. Mhm.
Awesome. So we will see you maybe some other time, getting more into detail onto any other topic that you'd like to share. So thank you for you also watching in the audience, and we will see you guys next time. Have a nice day or night there. Goodbye.
Bye bye.